Ladies and gentlemen, please acknowledge this year's Sappho Award recipient, Ezra Levant.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Wow. What an incredible reception. I'm touched by that. And thank you for inviting me to Copenhagen. I've never been here before. It's a beautiful city. I'm just putting a stopwatch on because otherwise I'll go on forever. I have to hurry back to Canada because on Monday I have another free speech trial, a 5-day trial at the hands of the Canadian Islamic Congress. I'll tell you a little bit more about them. So alas, I cannot take time to visit your beautiful city as much as I would like to. Thank you for the very kind introduction. I would only quarrel with one thing. Several times you said that I did these things alone. And I understand what you were trying to say. You were trying to give me credit. I appreciate that. But what I have learned is that this fight cannot be won alone. And the only way to win it is by reminding our fellow citizens of our deep cultural and historic and civilizational roots of freedom. And we have to remind our countries, Canada and Denmark and the whole West. And that is a person-by-person activity. Now, you talked about YouTube, and this happened when YouTube was a fairly new technology. PayPal was a new technology. That's how I paid my legal fees. These days, we have Facebook and Twitter as well. These are tools by which people use their free expression, but it's also tools by which we can defend freedom of expression. Part of the tactic of lawfare, which is a soft form of jihad. You can take on a critic of radical Islam with knives and guns and bombs, and unfortunately that happens too often, here in Europe even. Or you can take on a critic of radical Islam using and perverting and abusing a process of the Western legal system itself. No one has to blow themselves up. In fact, the Western society will use their own lawyers and own taxes to silence your opponent for you. Who is more effective? I put it to you that more damage was done to the Western tradition of liberty by the Danish cartoons incident than by 9/11 itself. Here's what I mean. When 4 jet planes were hijacked and attacked America in its heart in the name of radical Islam, America and the West straightened up and were alarmed and alerted and fought back and knew the name and face of the enemy. But other than being woken up for a moment at least, did we actually lose our freedom of speech? Did we actually lose our culture of freedom? Some would say there were losses. We've lost some privacy. But did it make us censors? Did we lose our liberty? Compare that to what happened when the Danish cartoons became an international issue, where hundreds were killed in places like Nigeria and Syria and Iran, but far more damaging was the self-censorship of thousands of Western TV producers, newspaper editors, the people we count on to be what I think it was Hayek called the second-hand dealers of information, the people we entrust to be our filters and gatekeepers and bring things to our attention. 1,000 editors, publishers, producers across the West decided with almost perfect uniformity to censor ourselves. I put it to you that self-censorship out of fear of violence, yes, but also fear of the hassle of a lawsuit and fear of being seen to be intolerant. That was a real fear. That, more than anything, motivated editors and publishers to say, we won't show the pictures, which not only banned and censored people from getting the news, but it also gave a moral approval of the violence. Well, these pictures must have been horrific if the Western press, which shows us anything lascivious or pornographic or controversial, my God, these cartoons must have been so horrific that CNN wouldn't show them. If there is no act of blasphemy or grotesque art that is not shown in the Western press, I think of United States, an artistic installation called Piss Christ, where Andres Serrano took a crucifix of Jesus, put it in a vial of his own urine, and took a picture. I know this because I've seen it in the Western media. It's called Piss Christ. In the Museum of Modern Art in New York City, they had a dung Madonna. That's what it was called. It was a Christian icon made out of elephant shit. And all of these images are discussed with the picture when it's blasphemy or insults against Christianity, against Judaism, but the one untouchable, uncriticizable religion, in the most gentle of ways. If you've seen those 12 cartoons, many of them they're either mocking the Jyllands-Posten or, are completely uncontroversial. But by saying so uniformly, it was as if there was a court publication ban. And in fact, there was, wasn't it? Except for it wasn't a civil court. It was a fatwa from the street. There was a court-ordered publication ban, wasn't there? But it was not any Western court. But for millions of people in Denmark and Canada and around the world to see, oh my God, my own newspaper, which shows me anything, won't show me these cartoons. They must have been awful. So it magnified the claim and the grievance of radical Islam. That, I put it to you, undid our tradition of skepticism, of criticism, of being able to say what we please, of understanding that controversy and offense have a healthy place in society. Obviously, we do not go out of our way in life to be offensive. Well, some people do. But it's not a generally good practice to be offensive and to be hateful. But let me read to you the exact wording of the law under which I was charged. As you can imagine, having been prosecuted under it for 900 days, I've memorized it. It is against the law in my province of Alberta, and until last year, federally in Canada, to publish anything, quote, likely to expose a person for hatred or contempt. Let me go through those words. Likely to. So that's future tense. That's in the future. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. In the future. How do you have a future crime? Have you seen that movie with Tom Cruise called Minority Report? It's actually a great movie. It's sort of a science fiction, dark future about three psychics who, in the department of pre-crime, these psychics know the future, that you are going to commit a crime in the future, and the police swoop in and arrest you right before you do it. You're under arrest. Well, I didn't do anything. We didn't say you did. But you were going to. This is the premise of the movie. It's actually quite a well-done movie. It's a novel by Philip K. Dick. It's a movie with Tom Cruise called Minority Report. That is a science fiction movie. But in Canada, likely to, that's a future crime. We don't have future crimes. You have to do something before you get in trouble. Likely to do what? I mean, I guess we do have sort of a future crime, uttering a death threat, right? I'm gonna kill you. Okay, that's sort of a future crime, but the test has to be imminent and credible, and the person has to have real fear. Like if I just say, I'm going to kill you, you're not scared, that's not a crime. It has to be menacing and imminent and urgent and credible, and you have to be afraid. We do have, I guess, a few future tense crimes. But what was this? This is likely to expose a person to hatred or contempt? Likely to expose someone to feelings. That's what hatred is. That's what contempt is. And this is my point about controversy and hate. If hate is a normal human emotion, what one of us doesn't feel love or hate, contempt or respect every day? When you're reading the sports scores, I love this team, I hate that team. In politics, I love these guys, I hate that guy. If you never feel hate, you actually don't have a normal personality. Now, you don't. I mean, if you never feel that emotion, you have a problem. I'm not saying we want to act violently on our feelings of hate. Part of being a grown-up is controlling our hate, transforming it into positive things. And if anyone acts on their hate in a violent way, then the law ought to come down on them. But let me read that law again. Likely to expose a person to hatred or contempt. If all it took to end hate was to pass a law, and you could therefore rewire human beings, just pass a law. The Love Each Other Act of 2014. And the law is passed. The Love Each Other Act is passed. It is now lawful. You must love each other. And if that's all it took, we would have done that a long time ago. But you can no more ban hate than you can ban love. But that's what this, it wasn't even a thought crime. It was a feelings crime, wasn't it? Likely to expose a person to hatred or contempt. Well, look what happens when that is your test. Where is the defense of truth? Journalists, if they publish something true, even if it's offensive, even if it's embarrassing, well, that's a good thing. In fact, the more offensive and the more embarrassing the truth is, perhaps the more valuable. If you expose corruption in a government, for example, that's offensive, that's controversial, that's hateful. You'll expose someone to hatred or contempt. But by God, that's important that crusading investigative journalist did so. If you want to fight the power in some way, I mean, think back over the last century. I'm a conservative, but let's talk for liberals now. What were the great challenges to the status quo of the last century? The suffragette movement, letting women vote. That was offensive in its day. Oh, how dare those little ladies want to run for office? Well, this place is full of women politicians. In its day, the idea that women and men were equal, that both should have a vote, that both could be a prime minister, was offensive, to some at least. Could you imagine if we had this law back then, or move forward to the civil rights movement in the United States, where blacks were equal to white? That was very offensive to some, or even more recently. Gay equality, offensive to some, still is offensive to some. Imagine if Section 13, that's the federal equivalent of the law under which I was charged, had been on the books. The suffragettes would have been prosecuted. Martin Luther King would have been prosecuted. Gay activists would have been prosecuted, because what they did was likely to expose a person to hatred or contempt. Damn straight. Now, I'm not saying that every offensive statement is noble and is progress. I'm not saying that. Probably 99% of offensive statements are junk, are not worth it. But in that dung heap, there is the occasional diamond. And if you say any hateful words are now banned, you eliminate the possibility of the progress that comes from breaking up the old order. By definition, you need to offend an old order to bring in a new one. Now, not every idea for a new future is valid, but all of our progress has come from offending the old order, even scientific orders to say that the earth revolves around the sun instead of the other way around. Science depends on being able to put forward new theories that offend. And some people are so passionately linked to their existing science that they will be full of hatred or contempt if you expose it. So not only that, but what else happens when you try to criminalize feelings? Well, the first thing is, since we all have feelings of love and hate, contempt and respect in us, and we often articulate them in some way, and remember, it doesn't even have to be objectively hateful. It just has to expose one person to feelings. So there's no test. I mean, it's basically the lowest common denominator. It gives a veto to the thinnest skinned person in the room. What we are doing is, just like that movie, Minority Report with Tom Cruise, everyone is guilty now. So it's just a matter of who's charged. Do you see what I mean? I bet you every single one of you in this room has done something that in someone's eyes today could possibly expose someone to hatred or contempt. I know you have, because you're normal humans and we're flawed and we're not perfect. And even if we're perfect, other people aren't, and there's miscommunication and misunderstanding and we hurt feelings. And so if the only test is what someone else might feel about you, likely to, future tense, then we're all guilty right now. And then all that matters is who the prosecutor goes after. And that's the thing. Since 1977, when this Section 13 was enacted in law in my country, isn't it funny that since 1977 that they have only prosecuted, well, let me just say it, white Christians. Now, I don't go around in life putting people into racial boxes, but by God, the Human Rights Commissions do. Isn't it funny that in Canada, they have never prosecuted a radical Muslim imam for hate speech? Never. Or in our country, there have been instances of Sikh extremism or Tamil extremism. But never is it prosecuted under the Human Rights Commission's hate speech. Why is that? Because it is a political choice. Because it's not even about who does it or who doesn't. Everyone does something that could be emotionally offensive. It's just the picking and choosing of the activists in that office. Oh, we're going to go after him now. We're going to go after him now. Now, for the first 30-odd years of this law being on the books, they went after marginal people who, frankly, were a little bit odious. They went after neo-Nazis. Typically, low education, low income, marginalized people who, instead of joining a gang, maybe joined a neo-Nazi group. They didn't have a deep understanding. They certainly didn't have a deep following. It was like hunting mice instead of big game, but they hunted the mice over the years, and they got a 100% conviction rate. Of course they had. If truth is not a defense, if fair comment is not a defense, if honest belief is not a defense, if the only test is if someone else had a feelings reaction to you, there is no defense. I publish a magazine article exposing corruption. My defense is truth. I don't care whose feelings are. You cannot get me because I've shown you the truth. That is no defense if the crime is the counterfeit human right not to be offended. And that's a tool, is they've taken a destruction of a human right. I know what my human rights are. Freedom of speech. Freedom of religion. The separation of mosque and state. These are real human rights. That's why we love the words human rights, which is why this attack on my human rights was done by something called the Human Rights Commission. Isn't it ironic? You're exactly right. This imam in Calgary first went to the police to arrest me. The police have a greater love for civil liberties in my country than do the Human Rights Commission. Human rights is their middle name. That is how they've gotten away with it. It's like counterfeit money. It devalues real money, and counterfeit human rights have started to destroy real human rights. This counterfeit human right not to be offended destroyed my freedom of religion and my freedom of expression and freedom of the press. Let me get back to the 100% conviction rate. Because they went after people who were poor, didn't have education, and were neo-Nazis, were socially offensive, the people who were controversial but with no redeeming social value, in Canada we forgot the importance of free speech even for people we hate. Free speech is one of those strange gifts that if we want it for ourselves, we have to give it to our opponents. Because if we don't give it to that lowly, ignorant neo-Nazi who says, I hate the Jews. I'm not talking about killing Jews or hurting Jews. I'm not talking about violence. If there's violence, throw them in jail, prosecute them for violence. I'm talking about thought crimes. Because if we allow 20 years of convictions of people who are merely racist because we don't like them, so we didn't come to their aid, well, when they come for us, we've got 20 years of legal precedent now. And if it was okay to go after the neo-Nazi for saying something anti-Jewish, why is it not okay to go after the publisher for publishing something that hurts some Muslims' feelings? What goes around comes around. And so when you finally say, well, I didn't care about free speech for the neo-Nazi, and I didn't care about free speech for him, oh, they're coming for me now, but I'm different, I'm special now. No. Freedom of speech is important for everyone. That's why in the United States, the ACLU, when there's a Ku Klux Klan member who's on trial for some hate speech, they send a Jewish lawyer or a black lawyer to make the point That we despise what these people stand for, but by God, we're going to fight in the first ditch, not the last ditch. If you got to fight, you may as well fight in the first ditch. It's a little bit more difficult to stand next to a neo-Nazi when you defend it, but if you don't do that in the 70s and 80s, then by the time it's 2014, you're the ones being prosecuted when you publish some harmless cartoons of the Muslim prophet Muhammad. Well, that's why I hated this law. And that's why, although I did literally hundreds of news stories, interviews, explaining why I published the cartoons, and the answer is obvious, it was a news story. I was in the news business. This was news. That's why I showed the central artifact of the news. Not that I supported these cartoons. I mean, many of them didn't really have a point. One of them looked like an Olympics logo. One of them looked like, Corey Blutkin, who would want to do that Child's Illustrated Quran, looked like, Muhammad in the desert with a camel. I mean, there was nothing political about them. But when I was asked by normal people on the street, why do you publish them? I said, because it's news. And we put the facts to our readers the same way a prosecutor might put evidence to a jury. Exhibit A, here's what the fuss is about. Make up your own mind. If I was in the radio business, I'd have to paint a mental picture. But because I was in the publishing business, I could show people the central artifact. If there was a dam that had burst, I would show a picture of the dam that burst. I would not say, go dam, I'm in favor of the dam. It's just, this is called reporting the news. That made it especially odious that I was prosecuted, not even for drawing these cartoons myself, not even for cheering for them or supporting them, but just, it was showing a fact of the news. Like, it's not even that I drew the cartoons myself as some form of expression. Many of them did not even have a political point, but merely for reporting the news. I was prosecuted. Stop and think about that. Stop and think about the danger there. And that's why I was so mad at all the rest of the media. My magazine was a small rebel magazine. We had 40,000 copies an issue. It was pretty small in Canadian standards. I always had sort of an inferiority complex because I wasn't a real publisher. But in that moment, I was the only real publisher in Canada. I was the only one standing up for journalistic ideals. Tell the truth. Be fearless. Freedom of speech. Separation of mosque and state. Now, I had worked for other media in the country, and I had called up some of my friends. I said to one of them, by God, this is right up your newspaper's editorial alley to show these cartoons. Why aren't you doing it? And I was told a very honest answer. He said, we have different offices around the country. The amount of security we would have to hire would cost us about $1 million. We can't afford that. We're not going to spend $1 million to cover the security costs of running one news story. You know what? Fair enough. No one has to go bankrupt, not that this would have bankrupted them. No one has to spend $1 million voluntarily to tell a news story. Would you? No. But then don't lie about it. Don't then say, oh, we don't think it's tasteful. Or we don't think it's newsworthy. The New York Times motto, all the news that's fit to print. Well, they wrote stories about it, but they didn't show the central artifact of the story. CNN blurred out the cartoons as if it was like some naked woman or something on TV. They pixelized, they blurred it out of, quote, respect for Islam. Oh, respect, is it? You have a respect for the tenets of Islam, do you? No, you don't. You have a fear of Islam. There was one newspaper, I think it was in Cincinnati, I've forgotten right now, maybe Philadelphia, where their editorial that day was, this is the darkest day in our magazine's history and the newspaper's history. We are simply afraid of publishing these cartoons. That's why we're not doing it. I appreciate the honesty. I appreciate the honesty. But when every other media says, oh, no, we respect religion. Oh, you do, eh? You show the dung Madonna and piss Christ, you respect religion. It's not newsworthy. Really, you got 20 stories about the cartoons, so you just won't show the cartoons. But it's not newsy, eh? Those excuses told me that there was a fear. That there was a fear that they dare not say. And that is my point. No one was afraid of speaking back to 9/11. No one's afraid of criticizing George W. Bush. But people were afraid of speaking out against these, or even showing the cartoons even in a neutral way. Here's Exhibit A. That is why this was so terrifying. When I was first hit with this human rights complaint, and legal fees started to rack up very quickly, and I started to study this law, I realized that it had a 100% conviction rate, and I quickly realized why. Because the Muslim imam who filed the complaint against me did not have to spend any money. He gave it to this government agency called the Human Rights Commission. He just gave it to them, and then they ran with it at taxpayers' expense. He didn't have to spend a dollar. And for 900 days, they investigated and prosecuted me. And I did an access to information request. I got the government documents. They had 15 different bureaucrats and lawyers working on my case. I don't know if you guys watch CSI Miami over here, but I was a major crime scene. They had more cops on my case than they do for major murders. I was a stimulus program for lawyers. My point is, after I had racked up $10,000 or $20,000 or $30,000 in legal fees, and was realizing there was no way I could win, because there's no defenses really, then they made an offer to me. They said, if you give this imam a full page in your magazine to say whatever he wants, and if you pay him, I think it was $2,000, then we'll let you go. And 90% of people take the deal. The other 10% fight it and lose. Because 90% of people, by this point, I think it was 6 months or a year into it, I see what's happening here. The process is the punishment. The other side has all the resources of the government. I am using my own money. There is no defenses here. Even if I win, I lose because I won't be reimbursed. I'll cut a check, swallow my pride, and just get out of this, and I sure as hell won't do it again. Well, and in most cases, they were going after people who had no resources to begin with. They were just flattened. But in my case, they found a stubborn mule. And I went online and I videoed my interrogation and I blogged about it. And after 900 days, I was not actually given my day in court. I was not given the opportunity to have a hearing. They just dropped the case. Just one day I got a letter saying, we're going to stop hunting you. But that didn't mean I was free. Because when a censor who's stamping this approved and this fail, approve, fail. When a censor decides that he's going to stamp you, oh, you're okay for now, you're still subject to censorship. If he said, well, you can go now, but I got my eye on you. And so the other thing I would quarrel with slightly is that I won. Too many more victories like that, and I'm done for. That's a $100,000 victory. The Alberta Human Rights Commission that went after me still exists. It got a $1 million budget increase after I roughed them up a bit. The federal law was repealed, it's true, but we have provinces in Canada, and these human rights commissions with similar laws exist in several provinces. What happened, though, was although there was not a win in a court of law, there was a win in the court of public opinion. And these human rights commissions have been denormalized. And let me close on that because I'm almost done my time. I had a discussion with our mutual friend Mark Stein very early when I was attacked by this Human Rights Commission. The first thing that happens when you are accused of hate speech for publishing a news story, the first thing that happens is you are shocked because they have said that what you do, freedom of the press, is now violating someone's counterfeit right to not to be offended. So you have just been told that your entire industry, your entire philosophy of freedom is subordinate to this fake human right not to be offended. So you're shocked. It's called the Canadian Human Rights Commission or Alberta Human Rights Commission. So immediately you are being told you don't represent Denmark or Canada. They do. That you are violating human rights, that you are an outsider, you are being stigmatized, that you are the other. They have you on the moral and psychological defensive, that you are abnormal. And then they tell you to play your part, to read your script of being abnormal. Will you confess? Will you confess and pay? Or will you fight us in a sham trial and we'll convict you? It all ends the same way. You are marginalized and denormalized. And it's very destabilizing, even for a confident person, to suddenly have a government institution name you as an enemy, as a hate criminal. I wasn't charged with a crime, but it was a civil offense. And this was the epiphany that I had in a conversation with Mark Stein. And it was, whoa, 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 no, no. You will not denormalize me. I will denormalize you. You will not tell me that I'm un-Canadian. I will tell you that you're un-Canadian. You will not tell me what a human right is, the counterfeit human right not to have your feelings hurt. I will tell you about freedom of speech. I will tell you of freedom of religion, freedom of association, the equality of men and women. I will tell you about something called the Magna Carta. And by the way, I will not submit quietly to a private interrogation with one light bulb swinging from the roof and someone in a leather outfit asking me questions. I will not go into your zone. I will haul you out into the bright light of public scrutiny, and I will show everyone in this country who you are. And that a government official with a business card that says Government of Alberta dares to ask me what my religious or political views are, and if I give the wrong answer, I will face a legal penalty. There's a right and a wrong answer to legal views. There's a right and a... If there wasn't a right or a wrong answer, why would you be asking it? You have compelled me to be here, and you said, what were your motivations? Well, there's a right and wrong answer to how you're motivated. If you give the wrong answer, you're in trouble. If you give the right answer, the censor will let you go. But watch your step. No, 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 no. And that was the light bulb that went on for me. And I decided, I will hunt you. But it's not done, and it can't be done alone. We must light the candle that has been burnt out by many people. We have to remind people of the importance of freedom of speech. We have to remind people that although being polite is a value, it is important to be polite. It is important to be tolerant of others, including newcomers. Yes, it is. But that is not the highest value. Certain things are non-negotiable. The equality of men and women, non-violent solutions to problems, democracy, and our core freedoms. We want to be polite, but we don't want politeness to be the most important thing. My friends, the battle continues. On Monday, I will be in court, in a different kind of court, a defamation court, for critical reports I made about the Canadian Islamic Congress in their fight against Mark Stein. This is just the next chapter in the same fight. I reported on Mark Stein's trial at the hands of the Canadian Islamic Congress. So the Canadian Islamic Congress is now suing me for my reports on Mark Stein. 6 years later, we're going to a Toronto court, which starts Monday at 10 a.m. It's a 5-day trial. But I do think we're winning. And it came down to that one epiphany. Will you allow them to tell you the way it is in Denmark? Or will you say you are the one who is changing what it means to be Danish? And I will remind you what Denmark is built on. And more than that, I will try to revive in my fellow Danes a memory of the fights for freedom we have had in the past. And although I will acknowledge that some speech can hurt feelings, I will acknowledge that. I will remind my neighbors that avoiding hurt feelings is not the civilizational goal of this country or the West. In fact, if you look to the places with the most censorship, you find the most violence. Because if people can't express things peacefully like a safety valve, all they can do is express things with their fist if they can't use their mouth. I've gone on for half an hour, so I think I should wrap up. I want to say thank you for giving me this award and for saying such inspirational things and for lighting the fire of freedom, not just in Denmark, but around the world. I'm very proud to be here. I regret I can't stay longer. I thank you for recognizing what me and other Canadians and other people are doing. And I promise that as long as I can, I will continue this fight.